everyone, and welcome to what I'm calling a copyright comedy in 3 parts. First thing that we're going to look at is Fatsapphicbro's original video kind of shaming creators. There was a follow-up video on his opinion of misinformation. We're going to go over that, and then we're going to go over the copyright notice that I got that he submitted that in no way is related to copyright, and I'll explain why. So unfortunately, he took down the original TikTok video, so I'm looking at Idle Aim's video. I was going to do Cynical Dude, but Cynical Dude pauses a lot more often, I think, and it's going to be easier to get the full video from Idle Aim. I believe Idle Aim is subscribed to me. Hi there. I hope you don't mind that I recorded this from your video. There was really no other way for me to get the Fatsapphicbro TikTok video. Shout out to Idle Aim, of course, because they also cover this fat logic, fat acceptance bullshit, and they're fun to watch. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into this.
Fat phobia. Let me show you something. Imagine living in a thin body and not understanding anything about what fat phobia or medical fat phobia is or means, and then dedicating your entire life to literally harassing and ridiculing a fat, disabled, transgender, queer creator. It's so pathetic and disgusting and shameful.
Okay, so I just want to make a quick note before we continue watching. One, this is something that Fatsapphicbro will do repeatedly, and we will look at this in this video, and I call this out pretty much every time, in which they weaponize their identities that they feel are marginalized, and some of them are, and some of them are more perceived marginalization, but they try to use that as a barrier for criticism. They try to use that as a barrier and as a be-all, end-all for why they should get what they want. Rather than presenting any sort of argument with supportive evidence, they cry marginalization and oppression and try to use their various identities as a shield to get what they want, as a tool to get what they want, and a shield from criticism.
Sad. This is the kind of shit that fat liberation content creators face on a daily basis.
Something else I would like to point out is that all of those videos that they were showing, not a single one had a red line underneath them, which means that they have not, at least up to the point of this video, they have not watched any of those videos, so they have no clue of what's actually being said.
I quite literally delete troll comments from my page multiple times a day.
From what I've seen, they delete anything, because there were a few comments that I read that I went back to screenshot, not for this video, but for a different one, for like, Fat Logic, a different Fat Logic video once. This was a couple months ago, and they were deleted, and it was, there are some that are kind of just harassment and mean, like, you know, fuck off fatty and that sort of thing, but some of them are saying you are citing old evidence, some actually put out cogent and related arguments against their point, providing a counterpoint, and Fatsapphicbro tends to delete them in the name of creating a safe space.
Every day. And there are a handful of creators on YouTube that are just ripping content from fat liberation creators.
So something that's important to note about this, and this will lead into something that we look at later in the video, they say that we are ripping content. And what ripping content in this context would mean was that we are taking the content, downloading, recording, whatever, and putting it wholesale up without transforming it in any way. And this is one of their fundamental misunderstandings of copyright that we will see when we go over the email. This is fundamentally not what is happening, and that is why YouTube has sided with us.
As a means to ridicule and harass us under the guise of education.
From what I've seen, not a single person has given commentary under the guise of education. We have spoken out about the misinformation that is provided by the fat liberation and fat acceptance movements and people in those movements, especially not just around the fat rhetoric, but also in terms of Marissa, the complete misunderstanding of what consent means. Toxic mentality that a lot of them share, the pressure, them attempting to pressure others into unhealthy lifestyles in the name of promoting marginalized people. This is not about education, this is about providing a counterpoint to your harmful narrative.
Even though their education is so completely wrong, they obviously lack the understanding on how to read and interpret research.
Okay, so this is something that repeatedly pisses me off about Fatsapphicbro. And I'm not gonna scream. And something that you might notice in this video is that I'm a little bit more petty and I'm a little bit even possibly mean. Not cruel. I'm not going after them in terms of even regarding their weight. I'm not going against them for their gender identity. I'm not going against them for anything of them as a person, but I am going to be a little bit mean in this aspect because I find that their repeated citing that they were in a master's program and did some basic fucking research, that they think that makes them an authority on anything. And it pisses me off. And quite frankly, the condescension has been something that has always been like an anger trigger for me since I was a kid. Apparently, I alarmed people when they would speak baby talk to me when I was like 3 or 4, and they would like talk in that child voice to me, and I would give them death glares, and they would ask my mom what was wrong, and she was like, "Yeah, don't talk to her that way." A condescension, just in general, is something that pisses me off so fucking much. Mostly because very few people deserve a sense of superiority over someone else. It would take an exorbitant amount of specific circumstances for a level of condescension I feel would be warranted. I'm going to be a little condescending in this video, and I feel it is warranted because I feel the need to point out the logical fallacies that Fatsapphicbro puts forth, and I feel the need to kind of dish out a little bit back of what they have put out. You want to be condescending and you want to act superior because of a level of education that you don't realize that plenty of others in our community, in the anti-fat acceptance community, fat liberation community, anti-fat liberation community, have. And yet you think that because there's just so many things wrong with it. For someone who claims to be an advocate for all sorts of marginalized people, you sure are classist as fuck. Not everyone has had the opportunity to go to a master's program. Not everyone has been in a position where they have been able to have this opportunity. And yet you use it as a way to not... It's not even just the matter of that you use it as an authority when it's not. And I'll get into that later. It's that you use it as a pedestal to put yourself above others. And it pisses me off. Because there are plenty of intelligent people, there are plenty of people that could talk circles around you and debate circles around you that do not have the level of education that you reached. And you didn't even finish your master's degree. We will get into that in a moment.
Articles because not everyone went to school to be a researcher like I did.
And that cracks me up. But I know not everyone went to be a researcher like I did. So, full disclosure, I'm re-recording this after having recorded the other 2 videos because I wasn't happy with the way this first one came out. And, spoiler that we'll get into, Fatsapphicbro was in a master's program for social work. Now, there's research-based master's programs, and then there's more professional, practical level master's programs. And the lines do blur because there's research associated with all of them, typically. But there's ones that have research and then more applications based, which is what I have and what I highly suspect is social work, given that social work is a very application based profession rather than a theoretical based profession. My guess is that a lot more of their work was on application based research, which is very different from theoretical based research that you would also do studies for. That does not mean that you went to school to be a researcher. Just because you went were in a master's program does not mean you went to school to be a researcher. I've been in two master's programs, actually. One was, they were actually both pretty professional based. One had a heavier research angle to it than another because there were two. The first one I went into was library and information science, and it split off into either a research focus or an application focus. And I took a few of the research-based classes, and they were very interesting, but it's not what I wanted to do. That could be what's going on with them and their social work master's program, but I doubt it. As with the education master's program that I'm currently in, it's far more application-based with two research-based classes because there is a level of research required for a master's degree. That does not necessarily... we're going to get into that in the second video, and I don't want to go too far off on a tangent on this, so let's just finish watching this. It's the condescension, my friends. It's the condescension that just gets to me.
And the absolute gross and disgusting assumptions they make about our bodies, our lives, our lifestyles, our doctors, our medical conditions. Like, it's really disgusting that these people actively harass a disabled transgender person.
And this is all sorts of not a... the criteria of not a good argument. Because you are making this... You are, one, making ad hominem attacks, meaning you are attacking us as people and not our arguments. You started to attack our arguments with the education-based thing that you were going for, except it was a complete misrepresentation of anything that anyone has put forth, really. We battle misinformation. We don't necessarily look to educate. There's a difference. Number one. Number two, your whole basis of your argument here is that we shouldn't make videos on you because of your various identities that you feel are marginalized. That is not a reason to not critique someone. That is not a reason to not criticize someone, and that is not a reason to not make videos on people that are spewing misinformation. You can be the most marginalized person in the world, and if you are still spewing misinformation that could potentially mislead and harm people that are younger, that use the app that you are using, I will make a video countering it. I will not attack a single one of your identities because that is not the purpose of my videos. But I will dispute your argument. There is a difference, and I feel like Fatsapphicbro does not understand the difference. In fact, I know they don't understand the difference, but that's for later.
Because I'm fat, and they don't like me because I'm fat. And they say that I spread medical misinformation.
Yeah,
Which one?
yeah,
I don't
you do.
give medical advice. I say,
So they just said they don't give medical advice, which is absolute fucking shit. Because we saw that. We saw it in the diabetes videos. And yes, I gotta be honest, some of the other creators have said they don't hate Fatsapphicbro. I personally hate them specifically because of those medical misinformation videos. And I hate them not because they're fat, not because they're disabled, but because the information that they put forth could directly cause someone harm. The information that they had given specifically in the diabetes video promoting testing, treating it like an allergy, is, one, classist as fuck because it assumes that everyone has an infinite number of diabetic test strips, which is not true. Diabetic test strips can be very expensive, and not everyone can afford them. So saying that you should do this series of experiments of eat one thing and then wait a little while and then test your blood sugar, which would result them testing their blood sugar more often than necessary, which would cause them to go through more supplies than necessary, which could financially harm them, as well as potentially future medically harm them if they can't afford more. And that is completely ignoring the shitty advice to begin with.
over and over again, I'm not a doctor. Don't do things just because I said so, because I'm not a doctor.
And yet you actively advocate for this shit. You actively advocate. It's on your fucking link tree. For fuck's sake. If you're gonna say, don't do something just because I say so, then don't fucking advertise it.
Misinformation. I actually cite my sources all of the time.
No, you don't. You do not cite your sources nearly often enough. How about that? We'll just put it that way. For someone who claims that they went to school to be a researcher, you sure as hell don't cite often enough. You might cite every once in a while, but citing once in a sea of videos is not enough. Just as citing once in a paper is not enough. Even if it's from the same source, you cite multiple times throughout your paper. You know why? Because people need to know where each and every claim is coming from. Just because you say that there was a study somewhere, look it up, that is not citing your sources. And Hotep Flotep has gone over your sources and has shown that they are massively out of date and have been debunked largely by later research.
Oh my god.
Anyway, this is the shit that some of us have to put up with on this site. And this has been a constant problem for a while now, and I am not the only content creator who has this problem. If you search fatphobia instead of my username, you will find a shit ton of other videos about other fat liberation content creators here on TikTok. It is absolutely disgusting, and YouTube needs to do something about this level of harassment that we are.
So, one, you have to prove that we're gonna get into this, but I'm so glad that Idle Aim had this video up because I wasn't able to see this through Cynical Dudes as much. But you say that YouTube needs to do something about this harassment, and yet you have not done anything to demonstrate harassment. Because your over broad claims on videos that are even shown that you have not watched, you can make these broad claims that we are attacking your identities, that we are denying your lived experiences, that we are... one thing we'll continually see later is that they say that we misgender them as a form of harassment when it's not. Most of us, I believe, do try our level best to respect pronouns as best we can. People, one, mess up, and two, I'll get into in the next portion why the misgendering initially likely happened.
We're dealing with. Also, these people need lives.
They just said these people need lives. So do you. Says the person that continually makes a good portion of their videos on medical misinformation entirely. You've put several ones... Oh my goodness. Look at your entire channel if you want to talk about who needs a life.
It's like, you dedicate your entire life to, like...
Talk about hubris. We do not dedicate our entire lives to making videos on you. I take maybe a couple hours out of my week to make these videos because I enjoy them and because I think that it's worth highlighting this stuff, because otherwise it feels like it's just getting absorbed into the cultural zeitgeist, which I don't really want it to be. It is a series of ideological differences. If you don't like it, it's interesting how you say that we spend our entire lives making videos on you, and yet you spend your entire life focusing on your fat liberation and fat acceptance content rather than just accepting that your way of life is unhealthy and that you should make efforts to change it. Were you just advocating for anti-bullying of fat people, I think a lot more people could get behind that, but what you do is you make it into an oppression Olympics issue, which is why so many people get frustrated. You and people like you in your fat acceptance and fat liberation content focus on trying to make it equivalent to racism, sexism, and ableism, and others, but we'll focus on those. You guys focus it so much, and then you try to control what other people do on their social media. You try to control not putting before and after photos. You could try to control people and how they talk about themselves. If someone is not allowed to say that they feel fat. You guys waste your entire lives focused on this shit.
Watching my videos and transcribing my videos, and then barely making any sense when you talk about my videos.
Says the person that hasn't watched a single one.
Really?
It's pathetic. It's...
Again, with the ad hominem attacks.
I'm the pathetic, sad, and they think I'm the pathetic and sad one when I'm over here living my best life.
And you're living your best life even though you continually put up things about how people harass you. You're living your best life even though you spend an exorbitant amount of time monitoring your comment section to make sure there isn't a single word of dissent. Really? You're living your best life.
Having to use something to be serious, right?
While they dedicate their life to something and somebody they hate.
You dedicate your life to something that you hate. You say you hate fatphobia. It doesn't really exist. But that's beside the point. You dedicate your life to what you define as fighting fat phobia, which is something that you hate. Do you not? You dedicate your life to fighting people putting up before and after photos because you hate them. You dedicate your life to providing information that goes against doctors' advice because you don't like the advice that doctors give.
It's pretty pathetic if you ask me, and it's really, really gross.
Again, ad hominem attacks rather than creating an actual cogent argument supported by evidence.
Updated boundary video time.
So that's the last of that video. Now we can look at another video that is actually still on their TikTok. And now that I think about it, in this first portion, I did try my best to use they, them pronouns. If I slipped up at any point and used he, him, I genuinely apologize. I did my very best. Any slip up was not intentional. But let's move on to their complete fallacy-ridden argument. Alright, moving on to their TikTok page. First thing I want to note, no bio. Their bio has actually been changed twice in the past couple of days. The first one was much like what we saw in my video. The second one included their pronouns, and then this is what the third one looks like, which just says no bio yet. Please I'm pointing this out because I'm going to refer to it later when we go over the copyright notice, but this is different than it was when I recorded my video, but even when I recorded my video, their pronouns were not put in their bio, and that is important for reference later. Now, a quick look at just a couple of his videos. So we have something on medical fat phobia. We have how do they test for fibromyalgia. So he's talking about testing for medical conditions. Stress causes high blood pressure. They are making a claim here for the cause of a condition. Herniated disc symptoms. Despite the fact that they are not a doctor, they are providing criteria for a medical condition. Alternative to fish oil pills. Again, this could be construed as health advice. HS supplements. Again, this particular drug for CPTSD and PTSD. Granted, this is in super good faith because I'm not actually watching these. I don't really feel like getting into it. My point only is, this whole thing on genetic illnesses. We might actually go over this at some point. But it's worth noting that they talk a lot about medical conditions. I'm sure most of them are probably ones that they experience or say that they experience. But the point is that you cannot convince me with as many medical videos as they make and how sloppy their arguments and how sloppy they structure what they say, that they have never given medical advice and that they cite all their sources, because we've seen plenty of times already when they have not. So, moving on to part 2 of our comedy is, have you taken your prereqs yet? Here is, it looks like this was their reply to someone else, or perhaps to their own video. But it says, if trolls gave a shit about misinformation, they'd come at anti-vaxxers and pro-ED accounts, but they only harass fat people. They lie constantly. They're going to go further into this argument, and I will respond in turn. Something I do want to note, though, before we get into it, comments have now been disabled on their account, only for mutual friends. Now, only they can comment on their TikTok videos. Just something interesting I thought was worth noting.
So the trolls keep commenting that they're pissed off because I spread medical misinformation. If they gave a shit about misinformation, they'd be coming at anti-vaxxers and the pro-ED.
So this is whataboutism at its best. Why are you coming at me? What about the anti-vaxxers? What about the anti-vaxxers? There's plenty of people going after the anti-vaxxers. Why not both? ¿Por qué no las dos? Why not? Why not? We can go after more than one thing. But most of us don't. Most of us focus on the fat acceptance community. You want to know why? Because no one else is talking about it. Everyone else is taking it at face value. In one of my earlier videos, we saw that the Department of Health was endorsing the anti-diet talk. It is a secret misinformation bubble that is going to burst into our cultural zeitgeist and be part of the next wave of political correctness when it really should not be. It is something that goes against science. It is something that promotes unhealthy lifestyles and puts an unfair burden on not only the healthcare system itself, but individual healthcare workers. People that allow themselves to get even to Fatsapphicbro's size. I believe they said that they were around 400 pounds. That is an unacceptable amount of weight to force healthcare workers to help you with. And by that, I mean, if you're in the hospital and you fall, they have to be able to catch you. They have to be able to help you so that way you don't sustain further injury. That is an exorbitant amount of responsibility and potential harm to put on someone who has multiple patients to care for. And as for the pro-ED accounts, I don't think that they outnumber fat acceptance at this point. And everyone, unlike fat acceptance, which is being pushed and pushed and pushed, that is why we see Tess Holliday on Cosmopolitan and that Sports Illustrated issue woman who is bigger. I don't remember her name. It is being pushed as something to be validated in our cultural consciousness. Anti-vaxxers are ridiculed repeatedly on social media, in public. It's not a thing where you have to be careful about what you say because worried about stepping on anyone's toes. Same with the pro-ED. Everyone says, I feel sorry for them. Any person that is not in that community says, I feel sorry for them. But this is wrong. I don't think that this should be happening. Fat acceptance is the one that does not have that initial reaction, that immediate reaction. Because on its surface, fat acceptance sounds reasonable. Yeah, don't bully fat people. What it gets into, though, is saying that more accommodations should be made for fat people rather than fat people losing weight. It is promoting this false narrative that weight is completely controlled by genetics, and it's promoted as a way to encourage people to live in a headspace of learned helplessness, much like Fatsapphicbro seems to be embodying themselves.
Counts, but they only harass fat people.
It's not harassment. I have never harassed anyone. What I do is I take what you say and I provide a counterpoint to it. Or sometimes, yes, I yell. But it's not harassment. I have never told my subscribers to go harass you. I have never attacked you based on an identity. You being trans, I've done my best to respect that. You're disabled. I don't think I've ever questioned your disabilities.
And in most of the videos and in the comments of most of the videos, I am being misgendered. I am being...
Okay, so bringing back to what we saw in the bio. As you'll recall, Fatsapphicbro does not put their pronouns in their bio. I thought that it said trans rights. I saw a couple of videos within the first couple that I saw talking about how they are trans. They present as male. I assumed that he, him pronouns were appropriate. I had nothing else to go on, so that is what I went with. If you were misgendered, I believe it was for lack of a better term, good faith misgendering. I don't think that people intentionally misgendered you. I think it was a situation of ignorance over malice. A lot of us, anyone that I think called you he, him, made a good faith effort to respect your pronouns.
I'm told that fibromyalgia does not exist. I am being told that type 2 diabetes has no genetic component. I'm being told I'm not really disabled, I'm just fat.
I have yet to hear anyone say that fibromyalgia does not exist. The type 2 diabetes thing, I think that's... Here's the thing. Type 2 diabetes tends to run in my family. I do think that there's a slight genetic component, but I think it's far more environmental than it is genetic. And granted, I haven't done my research on it, and I certainly don't trust theirs.
I'm being made into a caricature.
You made yourself a caricature. You make broad claims and don't support them. You clearly don't know how to support an argument in general. and you claim that anyone that disagrees with you is essentially harassing you. You made a caricature of yourself. You made yourself your own lol cow for the internet. That's why you're on Kiwi Farms.
I'm being told that I have never had a restrictive eating disorder. They're stating their opinion on what eating disorders are, which is ridiculous because we have a DSM that tells us what eating disorders are.
Love that they said that. And yet, you, Fatsapphicbro, have said that someone with any sort of restriction has an ED. You have said that someone that is intentionally losing weight and goes through a calorie deficit has an eating disorder. You yourself, this is a perfect example of our misinformation point that we creators continually make. You yourself have said that restricting anything is an ED behavior when it's not. So that's fine if you think that we're wrong on what an ED is, but you certainly haven't shown any level of accuracy in that domain either.
And some of us have taken classes to understand the DSM. I was literally working on a master's in social work when I became disabled. I was going to do social work research and therapy, and so I know how to read research articles. I know how to write.
No, you don't. No, you don't, because I've seen videos of you looking at a research article and say, well, if we scroll to the conclusion, that's not where you look. Going through all of I've had to do research again. It had been a long time since I looked at a research article before. I had commented on my previous video regarding Fatsapphicbro, but I've had a chance to read. I recently read, last week I had to read 19. And one, you take it, you scroll all the way down to the conclusion, and the conclusion is the most reductive point of the entire research article. You don't look at the problem statement. You do not look at any of the literature review. You don't look at the methodologies of the research, which will tell you the general scope of what any study that was being done was for. It'll tell you the parameters of the research that was being put forth. You ignore the results, which is generally a good place to take a look at some raw data. But if you didn't want to look at the results, that's okay. The discussion is the most important thing, in which it synthesizes everything so far. It points out how the results of the methodology of the study contribute to the overall narrative that was mentioned in the literature review. And instead you look at the conclusion, which is the most reductive part of the whole paper.
Research articles. I know how to do a degree of research. I know a lot about reading research.
A lot of people know a lot about reading research. They are really trying to fluff themselves up as this academic. When one, I would like to know when's the last time you were in school, because skills do deteriorate, and given that they don't cite a whole lot, and given that I'm pretty sure they don't have access to scholarly articles through universities, which is where you're going to get a lot of your most recent data, it seems they seem to be using mostly Google Scholar and Google in general to find their studies, which isn't wrong, but then knowledge gaps should be acknowledged in their videos.
I was literally a master's level research student.
That doesn't mean much, my friend. I'm a master's level research student, I guess, if you want to get one. I love that they're like, I'm a master level research student. Honey, you were a graduate student is what you were, a graduate level student. The master's program, if they didn't make it to the end, that means they didn't do their capstone or their master's thesis, whichever one it was for their program. Which means that while they might have done previous research articles, they probably didn't do a high level of rigor in their research, and that's what the thesis and the capstone of your program is for. It's for the amalgamation of everything else that you've learned to put together a true professional research article. And I love that they say that they've written research articles. If it's not published, then it's not really something to put out there as a source of authority for yourself. I've been in 2 different master's programs. One at a very rigorous university where I did my bachelor's degree that was difficult but very interesting. And then the one that I'm in now that I took that I'm doing more for professional purposes and it'll get me my master's. I haven't learned a goddamn thing in it. I haven't learned shit. And it's very possible to go through an entire program. It's still accredited, but the quality of schools varies widely. If they went to a private liberal arts college, which I wouldn't be surprised if they did, it's not necessarily going to be the same rigor as even a state university. And I'm not saying it has to be, like, I'm not saying that in order for it to be a good school, it has to be Ivy League. There's plenty of fantastic state universities. There's plenty of fantastic, I'm sure, private colleges. Knowing Fatsapphicbro, I'm not convinced that they were in a rigorous program that was truly challenging. But it seems to have fluffed up their ego plenty.
The trolls don't give a fuck about misinformation. They genuinely don't, because again, if they cared about misinformation, they'd be going after the...
I love that they're about to say the anti-vaxxers and the pro-ED people. And yet, you just got through telling us that you're a master levels research student, and yet you can't support a fucking argument to save your life. Because, honey, misinformation takes many forms. You promote information plenty. Just because you think that we should be focusing on the anti-vaxxers or the pro-ED people doesn't mean that we have to. Misinformation exists far beyond those two groups. They exist in your group too. You perpetuate it plenty. And this is what we call whataboutism, which is another logical fallacy. You are full of logical fallacies and you can't seem to make a point to save your life.
Plethora of misinformation that the diet industry and personal trainers and nutritionists like to spout on this app. But they don't. If you look at their content, they exclusively harass, ridicule, and bully fat.
We don't harass, ridicule, or bully. Most of the people that I've seen, the vast majority, do not harass, ridicule, or bully. I certainly don't. I primarily focus on your arguments. There have been a couple of times even where I called Marissa a bitch in my raw recording, and I cut that out because it's not helpful to my overall point. There's no point. Me calling her a bitch is an ad hominem attack. It only detracts from my overall point. And I understand making, some logical fallacies in the heat of the moment, but you can edit this and you choose not to, which means that you think that it's a valid point.
People. Bullying and harassment is not somebody disagreeing with you. I have never had a problem with people disagreeing with me.
That's a lie.
The people who make personal attacks at my identity, who I am, misgender me, make caricatures of me.
That's just completely false. You have a ton of issues with people that disagree with you. And once again, it seems like you're trying to use your multiple identities as a crutch and a way to insulate yourself from criticism. And it just doesn't work like that.
Say that my lived experience is not true, that I'm lying about my lived experience, saying that I don't have diagnosed conditions that there is plenty of research to back, diagnosed by more than one doctor. So
I don't care what relevance does that have to me criticizing your advice on diabetes management. I never denied that diabetes existed. I called out the misinformation that you are spreading that can potentially harm people.
Oh, yeah, it is not the disagreement. I don't really give a fuck about disagreement. You can disagree without making an entire video where you just harass and ridicule someone and...
See, that's the thing, is that they're like, you can disagree without making an entire video, and that's really the problem, because they stop there and they take a second to think, and then they go back through their whole spiel of harass, ridicule, bully, because that's all that they have, and that's all that they can claim. And the thing about that is that by saying harassment, ridicule, bullying based on multiple identities of my, or how do they identify, how have they put it, multiply marginalized personhood, what you're trying to do, you aren't trying to call out things that are happening to you. You are trying to use your identities as a shield for criticism that you don't want to hear.
act like their doctor and act like you understand their relationship with their doctor or who their doctor is or what their doctor knows about them. And it's just very annoying to have trolls think they know more about my life and my lifestyle when none of them have had a conversation with me.
Honey, you put how much out on TikTok? We are reacting to the you that you have presented to the internet. If you don't like assumptions being made, then put out other content that suggests otherwise. This isn't reality TV. No one is curating a perspective of you. You have curated this perspective of yourself. You have created this narrative for yourself based on what you've put out. I can now say that when you cry bullies and stuff, you won't necessarily stand behind that claim later because you took down that video. Now you're trying to come off as more intelligent and morally superior through your talk of misinformation or what have you.
Of them have asked me questions in good faith. None of them want to have a good faith conversation. They're just here for the shock factor because shock videos get views. Again, pathetic, sad. I don't waste my time with that shit.
And yet you say you don't like personal attacks, and yet you are perfectly fine putting out personal attacks by calling people pathetic. Here's the thing that I've typically found. It's not good to call out someone on something that you yourself are doing, because then you just look like a hypocrite. Just some food for thought, my friend. Alright, so we are finally looking at the copyright notice. Something to note, I am hiding their email and their legal name, which seems to be their dead name. I have no interest in harassment as much as they seem to think that I do. And we are mostly going to be looking at their fundamental, after all of that fluffing that they did for themselves about how intelligent that they are and how they were a master's level researcher and how that somehow gives validity to everything they spew out of their mouth when it doesn't. We're going to take a look at their fundamental misunderstanding of how copyright law works. First of all, this is part of the form that they had to fill out. The video that I made on them is the one that they cite. Describe the work allegedly infringed. My video, not from YouTube. The title of the original video, which they only cited mental health risks after bariatric surgery. A link to their TikTok video. Where does the content appear? Entire video. So here is the first issue. You can't say entire video when you're talking about where your comment appears. You have only cited one of your videos. I think I went over 4 or 5, but you've only cited one. That did not appear in the entire video. And by saying that it appears in the entire video, what you're doing is you're saying that I basically took your content and put it on repeat for like the 30 minutes that video went on. YouTube's going to take one look at that and see, no, that didn't happen, therefore it's an invalid claim. While I may have used your entire video, it does not appear in my entire video. That is something for you to be aware of, is that precision is key in any legal matter, even though this is kind of quasi-legal because you go through YouTube, you don't go to the courts. It still applies. You should not say the entire video because it just makes it seem like you're making a mountain out of a molehill, and that likely I had only taken part of your video when I took all of it. But here's the thing, even though I did take your entire video, actually, you know what? We'll get to that. So now it's, I say under penalty of perjury, basically that this is that they have ownership of what they're trying to claim and that they make this in good faith. This is the one thing that I'm going to give Fatsapphicbro. I think this was made in good faith, and what I mean by that is I think that they genuinely thought that they had a copyright claim because I used their multiple videos of theirs in their entirety, and I think that they thought that that automatically meant that copyright had been infringed upon when it has not. That's what good faith means. It means that they thought they had a genuine claim. They did not, but I believe that it was a good faith claim. So, next what it does is, we are concerned that your copyright notification may not be valid for some or all of the videos identified in your notification. So what's interesting, could they cite more than one video? Because in their original complaint, I've never done a copyright claim. I've never gone through the process of a copyright claim, so I don't know. But if they could make note of each video that was infringed upon, that might have helped their case. It still would have turned out in my favor, but it might have helped out their case, at least in the review process. Please keep in mind that in many countries it is legal to use copyrighted works in specific ways without the owner's authorization, particularly for transformative purposes such as news reporting, parody, comedy, or commentary, or review. And then the most important thing is, if you still believe your copyright is infringed upon, if you still believe copyright is infringed by the YouTube video identified in your notification, please explain in detail why you think so. We ask that you provide more detail, and we're going to take a look at their comments because it goes over these questions. And at the top was their email. That is why I cut the scroll. These two, I'm going to assume that they thought it was relevant because Fatsapphicbro seems to be the human embodiment of the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I think it goes to show how they think, because we saw with that last video that they thought that because if they were some master level researcher, because they were in a master's program, that adds all the validity in the world to anything that they say, when it does not. They think that gave them some superpower for research when it does not. So, how much of your copyrighted work is used? Multiple, full, entire videos. True. And this is where they mess up. How is the market for your original work affected by this use? Their response was, this person's followers come onto my TikTok page to harass me. They misgender me, use slurs, ridicule me, claim I am lying about my lived experiences, and make many rude comments about my weight, health, and disabilities. The thing is that when it says, how is the market for your original work affected by this use, they are asking monetarily, how were you affected? This claim for emotional validity is not the answer, because what copyright does is, copyright infringement, you have to prove that I harmed the marketability of your videos. Your videos are free, meaning that there was no ad revenue loss, there was no money to be made that you couldn't make because I put your videos in mine. That was not an issue, therefore marketability wasn't affected. You could potentially claim, if I had done anything that you claim that I had done, I might have affected your image. If I had slandered you and said that you had committed awful crimes or whatever, that might be something that would affect the marketability of your channel. If I went through your videos in succession and just, even compilations though can fall under fair use with a little bit of editing, but let's pretend, let's actually, you know what, I know, we'll say that I took your TikTok, made it a YouTube short, and uploaded it, claiming it as my own and getting some, can you get ad revenue off shorts? I think you can. And I was getting it that way. Meanwhile, you have been in the process of moving your TikToks over to a YouTube as YouTube Shorts. That affects the marketability. It may not affect the marketability of your TikTok, but it affects the marketability of your YouTube. And given that this is your own copyrighted material, that would be something in your favor. What you're listing here is not a copyright issue. It is a community guidelines issue, if it were true. This person's followers come onto my TikTok page to harass me. First, you would have to prove that I personally sent them there or incited them to go and harass you with my words. I've said repeatedly on my videos to not go and harass the people that I cover. So anything that my followers do is outside of my control and I cannot be held liable for that. Please keep in mind, I am not a lawyer. I am not a lawyer. So do not take any of this to heart. I almost forgot. I got so into my own explanation. I cannot stress this enough, you guys. I am not a lawyer. This is my understanding of the law. This is my understanding of the law as someone who took one class on contract law and grew up around family members in the legal profession that are not lawyers either. Just so we're clear. They misgender me. So they misgender me and use slurs. One, you would have to timestamp the slurs and list the slurs that were used if that was going to be your claim. The misgendering, you also have to prove. The misgendering itself may not be seen as harassment. It could be if it's done enough, but you would also have to prove that there was malicious intent behind it. because you did not put your pronouns in your bio, so how was I supposed to know? My followers were kind enough to let me know, therefore I have continued to use they them pronouns for you. But this was an instance of ignorance, not malice, much how this whole copyright issue was ignorance, not malice from you. Because you're just ignorant of how legal things work. You just haven't had the opportunity to learn. Perhaps you have an overinflated ego, which is what I think the issue is. Ridicule me. Where's the timestamps? Where did I ridicule you? Give me specific examples. This is a thing with anything legal. You have to give specifics. Claim I'm lying about lived experiences. Where? What timestamp? Tell me. And make many rude comments about my weight, health, and disabilities. Again, where? Where in the video did I do that? Provide timestamps. This requires you to watch through the video and take notes. This requires you to go in and find where I am infringing on community guidelines. And it would not be a copyright claim. It would be a community guidelines violation. But even then, you still need to provide proof. Does the use significantly transform your original work, or does it serve the same purpose? And again, they say, it takes my entire work and uses it as a means of ridicule and harassment. This person misgenders me, uses slurs, ridicules me, claims I'm lying about my lived experiences, and makes many rude comments about my weight, health, and disabilities. They specifically target me as a multiply marginalized person. So, I do take the entire work. This whole thing is irrelevant to copyright. It's completely irrelevant. That's community guidelines issue, but it's completely irrelevant to copyright. What I do, if I have transformed your work and use it as a way of ridiculing and harassing you, that's not a copyright issue. At least as far as I know. Again, not a lawyer, guys. Not a lawyer. What I have to do, and this is, so here's an example of something that could be reasonably seen as something that is not significantly transformed enough. My first two videos regarding Virgie, the introduction and the chapter 1, maybe even chapter 2, the visuals for that are just the words of the book. This provides, someone could mute me and read the book and it would essentially provide the same experience. They'd have to fast forward in my video a little bit to find when I turn the page or whatever, use the arrow key, whatever. That itself would possibly be a claim for Virgie. Now here's the issue with Virgie's potential claim against me if that were to happen. It's that I use only the introduction and the first chapter, which are largely found on Amazon, meaning that it was already available to the general public at no cost and therefore did not affect her marketability. That is why I took the visuals off on subsequent videos. Me reading out her story is transformative because, one, I'm reading it myself, and therefore it is a performance. I'm also infusing my own commentary there, in between paragraphs and sometimes in between sentences, and therefore it is transformative because I'm providing commentary. It is not the same experience as someone that just wants to read the book because they like Virgie. And lastly, I want to talk about this. They specifically target me as a multiply marginalized person. It's so clear that they think that they have a weapon here. That I am marginalized and need to be protected, and therefore you should take down their video. And that's not how it works. I significantly transformed your content by providing my own commentary, and it did not affect the marketability. I did not slander you. I did not do anything that you could make money from. Therefore, your marketability was left intact. And the fact that you think that your identities are a hammer that you can use to make the law work in your favor truly goes to show how ignorant you are of how law works. There were no timestamps for anything that you said, which would be necessary. If you save the entire video, then my entire video has to be your video. Otherwise, you need to timestamp it. But this is a case, the fact is that Fatsapphicbro was lazy. They were lazy. They just wanted to be able to copy and paste all of this shit and get everyone's videos taken down. And what really pisses me off is I fully expect a video commenting about how YouTube hates fat people because none of these videos were taken down. And I know for a fact that it's going to perpetuate in their own mind that they are a victim because this didn't work. When in reality, they are completely ignorant as to the requirements needed to get a successful copyright claim taken down. And they tried to weaponize their identities rather than make an actual cogent argument that was supported with citations of the video. For someone who claims that you are a master's level researcher, which really doesn't make a fuck bit of difference. Like, they really love that really irritated me because, one, it felt a little classist. Not everyone can go to graduate school. Not everyone can be in a master's program, and people can be plenty good researchers without it. I have learned nothing in this master's program that I didn't learn in my bachelor's degree. Now, granted, the master's program that I'm in now isn't fantastic by any means. By the time I realized how kind of shitty it was, I was in too deep, so I just stayed, and I'm like, might as well finish it out. Plus, I'm getting it not because I want to be a researcher. I'm not really interested in research, but I get a pay bump when I become a teacher if I have a master's degree. So the quality of the school didn't matter as much for this. Now, for my first master's program that I didn't finish because of financial issues, I chose it for its rigor, and it was very much worth it, and I was challenged in the material. But when it comes to this master's program, I had more rigorous study in my bachelor's, which was also at a far more credible school, at a far more rigorous school. It was actually, like, on one of the... I was an English major, and on one of those lists of, like, top English programs in the U.S., mine was in the top 5. So, it was not an Ivy League, for the record. It was not an Ivy League. But it did rank very high for its English. My school ranked very high for its English program. I didn't know that when I applied there. It was the closest school to my home at the time, and that's why I went. But it was very rigorous, and it taught me how to support an argument, much unlike our friend Fatsapphicbro. And my voice is fucking going. I've been talking so long. Oh my god. YouTube, as you can see down here, did not end up taking down my video because this was a whole crock of shit. And I'm irritated that Fatsapphicbro is going to say that, because I know that they're going to say this at some point. They're going to say that YouTube doesn't care about fat people and they were marginalized yet again, or whatever, rather than taking responsibility for their very shitty attempt at a copyright claim. But I'm going to leave it there. I've been talking so long. My throat hurts. So I'm going to leave it. Thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It ended up being far longer than I expected. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.